Welcome back to Betrayal Stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and if there's one thing I've learned in 30 years, it's this: being part of a family doesn't always mean you'll be treated like one. Growing up, I always believed that if I worked harder, loved harder, and stayed loyal, eventually my parents would see me the way they saw my older sister. I spent my entire childhood chasing their approval. I never caught it. Every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering ended the same way. Emily was celebrated. I was overlooked. For years, I convinced myself it wasn't intentional. Until the day my parents asked me to make one more sacrifice. For Emily. That was the day I realized something that changed my life forever. My family wasn't choosing between two daughters. They had already made their choice years ago. I was just the last person to accept it. Emily is 3 years older than me. If you asked my parents, she'd tell you she was the responsible one, the successful one, the golden child. If you asked anyone outside our family, they'd probably think we had a normal relationship. Pictures can be deceiving. Every Christmas card showed two smiling daughters standing beside proud parents. Nobody could see what happened before the camera came out. Emily always stood in the middle. I stood wherever there was space. That pretty much summed up my childhood. When I was 8 years old, I entered my first school science fair. I spent weeks building a volcano with papier-mâché, paint, and baking soda. Dad promised he'd come see it. I wouldn't miss it, he said. I believed him. I kept looking toward the gym doors every few minutes. Parents came in carrying flowers. Some brought balloons. Others had cameras. Every time the doors opened, my heart jumped. It was never him. When the awards were announced, I won first place. My teacher hugged me. "You should be proud of yourself." I smiled. But I couldn't stop staring at the empty seat my dad was supposed to be sitting in. That evening, he finally came home. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." Emily had soccer practice. We couldn't be in two places. I nodded like I understood. Because that's what I always did. Later that night, I found the blue ribbon sitting on the kitchen counter. Nobody had even asked to see it. I quietly carried it upstairs and taped it inside my closet door. Not because I wanted to admire it. Because I didn't want to throw it away. Things like that happened all the time. When Emily made the honor roll, we went out to dinner. When I made the honor roll, Mom smiled and said, "Keep it up." When Emily got her driver's license, Dad surprised her with a used Honda Civic. When I passed mine, Dad handed me bus schedules and said, "Your school isn't that far." I got my first job at 16. Not because I wanted extra spending money. Because I wanted to buy the things my parents said they couldn't afford. My own laptop. My own phone. Even my prom dress. Emily never had to worry about any of that. Whenever I asked why things were different, Mom always had the same answer. "Your sister needs us more." I heard that sentence so many times. It eventually stopped hurting. It simply became normal. After high school, I earned a partial scholarship to the University of Texas. I was so excited that I drove straight home to tell everyone. Mom hugged me. Dad smiled. Emily looked up from her phone for maybe 2 seconds. Then Mom cleared her throat. "We actually have something to tell you too." Dad looked uncomfortable. Emily suddenly became very interested in her coffee. "What is it?" I asked. Mom reached across the table. "Emily's been accepted into a private college." "That's amazing." "It is." Dad took a deep breath. "The tuition is expensive." I already knew where the conversation was going. "We're using your college fund to help her." For a second, I honestly thought they were joking. "My college fund?" Dad nodded. "You have a scholarship. Emily doesn't." I stared at them. "So, it's just gone? We're still helping both of you." "No." I shook my head. "You're helping Emily. I just happen to be standing here." Nobody said anything. Emily quietly whispered, "I'm sorry." But she never offered to say no. She never offered to split it. She simply accepted it. Just like she accepted everything else. That night, I cried for the first time in years. Not because of the money. Because I finally understood my place in the family. I wasn't the daughter they invested in. I was the backup plan. The one expected to understand. to sacrifice, to forgive. Always. For years later, I graduated debt-free because I worked 2 jobs while finishing college. It wasn't easy. Some nights I survived on instant noodles because they were cheap. Meanwhile, Emily posted pictures from weekend ski trips with friends. Life didn't seem fair. But I kept moving forward. After graduation, I landed a marketing job in Dallas. I rented a tiny apartment, bought secondhand furniture, worked hard. Within 5 years, I became a senior marketing manager. For the first time in my life, everything I had belonged to me. No favors, no handouts, just hard work. Ironically, that was exactly when my family started calling more often. At first, it seemed innocent. Mom wanted to catch up. Dad wanted to know about work. Emily even texted me every now and then. I thought maybe things were finally changing. I wanted to believe it. I should have known better. Because every time my family suddenly became interested in my life, it was never because they missed me. It was because they needed something. And this time, what they were about to ask would test every ounce of patience I had left. The first call came on a Tuesday evening. I had just gotten home from work, kicked off my heels, and was halfway through making pasta when my phone lit up. Mom. I almost let it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. Hey, Mom. Her voice was unusually cheerful. Hi, sweetheart. How have you been? That should have been my first warning. My mother never started conversations with small talk unless she wanted something. I'm good. Just got home from work. That's wonderful. She paused. So, are you busy this weekend? A little. Why? We're having dinner Sunday. I'd love for you to come. I smiled. Sure. And Emily will be there too. Of course she would. Sounds good. Perfect. We'll see you at 6. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. When I hung up, I couldn't explain it, but something felt strange. Mom sounded rehearsed. Like she'd practiced every sentence before dialing my number. Sunday evening, I drove to my parents' house. Nothing had changed. The same white shutters. The same flower beds Dad planted every spring. The same porch swing where I'd spent countless summer evenings reading books while Emily was inside getting all the attention. Walking through that front door always made me feel 16 again. Mom hugged me. You look wonderful. Thanks. Dad smiled. It's good to see you. Emily walked in from the kitchen carrying a glass of wine. There she is. She hugged me quickly before stepping back. You look tired. I've had a busy week. She laughed. When don't you? Dinner felt odd. Everyone was unusually nice. Dad asked about work. Mom complimented my new haircut. Emily actually listened while I talked. It was almost unsettling. About halfway through dinner, Dad cleared his throat. There was actually another reason we wanted everyone together. There it was. I slowly set my fork down. Mom reached for Dad's hand. Emily suddenly became very interested in her mashed potatoes. I already knew. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a meeting. Dad sighed. Emily's having a difficult time. I looked at my sister. She refused to meet my eyes. What happened? Mom answered instead. Her company downsized. She lost her job. I'm sorry, I said honestly. Losing a job is hard. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Emily finally spoke. I've been interviewing. It just hasn't worked out yet. Something will come along, I said. I hope so. Silence settled over the table. Then Mom smiled at me. You've always been so good with money. There it was. I could almost predict the next sentence. We were hoping. Dad hesitated. That maybe you could help Emily for a little while. I blinked. What kind of help? Emily finally looked up. I found a condo. It's perfect. It's close to downtown. It'll make job hunting easier. I frowned. What does that have to do with me? Mom answered before Emily could. She needs someone to co-sign the mortgage. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want me to co-sign a mortgage? It would only be temporary, Mom said quickly. Until she's working again. I looked at Emily. What happens if you can't make the payments? I will. That's not what I asked. She looked away. Dad jumped in. Sarah, she's your sister. I know exactly who she is. Mom's smile disappeared. Families help each other. I leaned back in my chair. Interesting. What does that mean? Mom asked. It means I don't remember anyone helping me pay for college. The room went silent. I don't remember anyone buying me a car. I don't remember anyone offering to co-sign anything for me. Dad rubbed his forehead. That was years ago. It still happened. Mom sighed dramatically. You always bring up the past. No, I bring up patterns. Emily finally spoke. You act like everything was handed to me. I stared at her. Wasn't it? Her face turned red. I worked hard too. I'm sure you did. But every time life got difficult, you had Mom and Dad. When life got difficult for me, I got a second job. Nobody had an answer for that. Dad looked frustrated. So you're saying no? I'm saying I won't risk my financial future. Emily pushed her chair back. I knew she'd make this about herself. I couldn't believe she'd actually said that. About myself? You asked me to guarantee hundreds of thousands of dollars. She crossed her arms. Forget it. I'll figure something out. She stormed upstairs. A few seconds later, her bedroom door slammed. Mom glared at me. You could have handled that better. I stood. So could all of you. Dad looked disappointed. I expected more from you. That sentence hurt. Not because it was new. Because I'd heard it my entire life. They always expected more from me. Never from Emily. I grabbed my purse. I should go. Mom didn't stop me. Neither did Dad. As I walked toward the front door, I heard Mom quietly say, I just don't understand why she can't do one nice thing for her sister. I stopped, turned around, and for the first time in my life, I decided I wasn't going to stay quiet. I've spent 30 years doing nice things for Emily. I gave up my college fund. I never complained when everything went to her. I smiled through birthdays that weren't really mine. I accepted being second place over and over again. I looked at each of them. So don't tell me I don't do nice things. I've just finally decided to stop sacrificing myself. Nobody spoke. Because deep down, they knew I was telling the truth. I walked out of the house. Halfway to my car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. I can't believe you'd embarrass me in front of Mom and Dad. I stared at the message. Then another one appeared. Forget I even asked. A third message followed almost immediately. Don't bother coming to Thanksgiving. I looked at the screen for a long moment. Then I locked my phone without replying. For the first time, I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. I just didn't realize that skipping Thanksgiving was exactly what my family wanted. Because while I was sitting alone in my apartment, they were about to make a decision that would change all of our lives. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent the day exactly the way my family expected. Alone. At least, that's what they probably imagined. Instead, I drove to my best friend Olivia's house. Her family had been inviting me for years, but I always turned them down because I thought holidays were supposed to be spent with your own family. That year was different. The second Olivia opened the door, she wrapped me in a hug. You made it. I almost didn't. I'm glad you did. Her parents treated me like I'd been part of the family forever. There were no awkward questions. No guilt. No comparisons. Her mom handed me a plate before I even sat down. Her dad asked about work and actually listened to my answer. It felt normal. I couldn't remember the last time a family dinner felt normal. As I drove home that night, I realized something that made me unexpectedly emotional. Sometimes the people who love you aren't the people you're related to. Sometimes they're the people who choose you. The following Monday, I walked into the office feeling lighter than I had in months. I buried myself in work. By Friday afternoon, my boss stopped by my office. Got a minute? Of course. He closed the door behind him. I've got good news. I smiled. I like good news. We're creating a new regional director position. My heart skipped. I'd like you to take it. For a second, I couldn't speak. The promotion came with a significant raise, company stock, and the opportunity to lead offices across 3 states. I don't know what to say. Say yes. I laughed. Then yes. We shook hands. As I walked back to my desk, my phone buzzed. Mom calling. I ignored it. A minute later, she called again. Then again. By the fourth call, I knew something had happened. I answered. Mom? She sounded frantic. Sarah, I need you to come over. What happened? It's your father. My heart dropped. Is he okay? Please, just come. I drove faster than I probably should have. By the time I reached the house, an ambulance was parked outside. Dad was sitting on the back step with a blanket around his shoulders. Relief washed over me. He was alive. A paramedic smiled. It wasn't a heart attack, just extremely high blood pressure. Dad looked exhausted. I scared everyone. I hugged him tightly. You scared me too. Inside the house, Emily sat on the couch staring at her phone. She barely looked up when I walked in. That shouldn't have surprised me anymore. After the paramedics left, we all sat around the living room. Dad looked older than I remembered. I've been under a lot of stress. Mom squeezed his hand. We all have. I noticed unopened bills spread across the coffee table. That wasn't like my parents. Dad had always been careful with money. Very careful. I glanced at one envelope. It was stamped final notice. Something wasn't right. Later that evening, while Mom was making coffee, I quietly asked Dad, "What's going on?" He hesitated. "Nothing you need to worry about." Dad. He looked toward the kitchen to make sure Mom wasn't listening. "We've had some financial setbacks." "What kind of setbacks?" He rubbed his forehead. "I invested in something." Emily's idea. My stomach tightened. "What did you invest in?" "A boutique." I blinked. "A boutique." He nodded. Emily wanted to open her own clothing store. She said she'd done the research. She promised it would be profitable. I already knew where this was going. It wasn't. Dad slowly shook his head. "We lost almost everything." I stared at him. "How much?" He looked down at the floor. "Almost $400,000. I honestly thought I'd heard him wrong. $400,000? It was our retirement. I couldn't breathe. "You gave Emily your retirement savings?" We believed in her. I looked across the room at my sister. She was laughing at something on her phone. Laughing. While our parents were drowning. I stood and walked over to her. "Can we talk?" She sighed dramatically. "About what now?" "The boutique." She shrugged. "What about it?" "Dad said they invested their retirement." So, it's gone. It didn't work out." She said it so casually that I felt my jaw tighten. "Do you even realize what happened? Businesses fail. They knew the risk. You asked them to take that risk." She rolled her eyes. "They wanted to help." "No. They wanted to save you." Again. She stood up. "You're acting like I forced them. You didn't stop them." Her face hardened. "You've always been jealous of me." I couldn't believe it. Jealous. Of what? Losing $400,000? She stepped closer. "Mom and Dad chose to help me because they believe in me." Those words hit harder than she probably intended. Not because they were cruel. Because they were true. They did choose her. Every single time. Dad walked over before the argument could get worse. "That's enough." I looked at him. "No, Dad. It isn't enough. You emptied your retirement. You almost ended up in the hospital. And she's acting like it's no big deal." Dad looked tired. "So, what do you want us to do now?" I looked around the room. For years, I'd wanted them to admit the truth. Just once. Just once, I wanted someone to say they had treated us differently. Instead, Mom walked back into the room carrying coffee. "We're family. We'll figure it out together." I almost laughed. Together. That word sounded familiar. Except together always seemed to mean one thing in our family. Everyone sacrificed. For Emily. As I picked up my coat to leave, Dad quietly called my name. "Sarah." I turned around. "There may be one more thing we need to ask you." I closed my eyes for a second. Somehow, I already knew exactly where this conversation was headed. And I had a feeling. This next request would be bigger than anything they'd ever asked of me before. I didn't answer Dad right away. I already knew what was coming. There was only one reason my parents ever looked this nervous when they talked to me. They needed something. I slowly put my coat back down. "What is it?" Dad looked at Mom. Mom looked at Emily. Emily suddenly found the floor very interesting. Finally, Dad took a deep breath. The bank is starting foreclosure proceedings. I frowned. On what? The house. For a second, I forgot how to speak. The house? He nodded. We used it as collateral for the loan. I looked around the living room. This house wasn't just a building. It held every birthday, every Christmas morning, every childhood memory I had. Whether they had treated me fairly or not, it was still home. How long have you known? Mom answered quietly. About 3 months. 3 months. And nobody told me? We didn't want to worry you. I almost laughed. You didn't want to worry me? You were willing to lose the house instead. Silence filled the room. Then Dad looked directly at me. The bank gave us one last option. I closed my eyes. Let me guess. They need another borrower. He nodded. They'll refinance if someone with strong credit joins the loan. There it was. The real reason I'd been invited back into the family. Not because they missed me. Not because they wanted to fix our relationship. Because my credit score was over 800. Because I had a stable income. Because I had become useful. Mom reached for my hand. Sarah, we'd never ask if we had another choice. I gently pulled my hand away. You already had another choice. They looked confused. Emily. The room became quiet. I turned toward my sister. The money was for your business. The loan was taken out because of your business. So why aren't they asking you? Emily folded her arms. I don't qualify. Exactly. And whose fault is that? Her expression hardened. I've had a rough couple of years. So have I. The difference is, I dealt with my problems. I didn't expect everyone else to. Mom suddenly stood up. That's enough. No. I looked at her calmly. It isn't. For 30 years, I've watched all of you rescue Emily from every bad decision she ever made. Every time. And every single time. I was expected to pay the price. Dad sighed. We're not asking you to pay. I stared at him. You literally are. He looked away. The truth was impossible to argue with. The refinance would make me legally responsible for the debt. If anything happened, it wouldn't destroy Emily's future. It would destroy mine. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We could lose everything. I felt my own eyes sting. I know. And I hate that. I truly do. But I can't spend the rest of my life cleaning up someone else's mistakes. Emily suddenly stood. I knew she'd say no. She grabbed her purse. You've always loved proving you're better than everyone. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I never said I was better. I just refused to keep sacrificing my future. She laughed sarcastically. Congratulations. I hope you're happy when Mom and Dad lose their house. Then she walked out. The front door slammed behind her. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. A few minutes later, I quietly picked up my coat. I'm sorry. I really am. But my answer is no. I walked toward the door. This time, Dad didn't try to stop me. 3 days passed. No calls. No texts. No emails. Honestly, it was peaceful. Then Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Aunt Linda. I smiled. She was Dad's older sister. Unlike everyone else in the family, she'd always treated Emily and me the same. Hi, Aunt Linda. Sweetheart. Her voice sounded serious. I just got off the phone with your mother. I sighed. I figured. She told me you refused to help save the house. I did. There was a long pause. Then she surprised me. I'm proud of you. I blinked. What? You heard me. I've watched this family expect you to fix everyone's problems since you were a little girl. My throat tightened. I thought I was the only one who noticed. Oh, honey. Everyone noticed. I frowned. Then why didn't anyone say anything? Because your parents never listened. Her answer hurt because it felt true. She continued. Can I tell you something your father doesn't know I know? Of course. The boutique wasn't the first time they bailed Emily out. I sat down on my couch. What do you mean? Linda sighed. About 10 years ago. They secretly paid off nearly $80,000 of Emily's credit card debt. I froze. 80,000? She'd been hiding it for years. And they used part of your college fund to pay it. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. My college fund? Yes. I remembered that conversation. I remembered Dad telling me they needed the money because Emily got into a private college. That wasn't the whole truth. Not even close. Part of that money had gone toward paying off her debt. They had lied to me. For years. Aunt Linda continued softly. I almost told you back then. Your mother begged me not to. Tears rolled down my face before I realized I was crying. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was the lie. The years of believing there simply wasn't enough for both daughters. There had been enough. They had just chosen where it went. Linda spoke again. Sarah, there's something else you should know. I wiped my eyes. What? I don't think your parents are telling you how bad things really are. What do you mean? They're not just behind on the mortgage. They're being sued. My heart skipped. Sued. By one of Emily's business suppliers. I stood up. What? They personally guaranteed part of her business debt. I felt sick. This wasn't just a failed boutique anymore. This was a financial disaster. And suddenly, everything made sense. They weren't asking me to save the house. They were asking me to save all of them. What none of us knew was that within the next week, a letter would arrive that would expose a family secret hidden for more than 25 years. And after that, nothing would ever be the same again. For the next few days, I couldn't focus on anything. I'd sit at my desk, staring at my computer screen, realizing I'd been reading the same email for 10 minutes without understanding a single word. My mind kept replaying everything Aunt Linda had told me. The college fund, Emily's credit card debt, the failed boutique, the mortgage, the lawsuit, and the handwritten letter Dad had left on my kitchen table. For years, I'd convinced myself my parents simply made bad decisions. Now I understood something much worse. Their choices weren't accidents. They were deliberate. Every time they had to choose between us, they chose Emily. And every time they needed someone to absorb the consequences, they chose me. 3 days later, Dad called. His voice sounded calmer than it had in weeks. Sarah, could we have lunch? I hesitated. I don't want to argue. I don't either. I just want to explain. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small diner halfway between our homes. The same place he'd taken me for pancakes when I was a little girl. Back when I still believed I was Daddy's little girl. He was already sitting in a booth when I arrived. A cup of coffee sat untouched in front of him. You look tired, I said. I haven't been sleeping. Neither had I. For a while, we talked about ordinary things. Work, the weather, football, anything except the reason we were there. Finally, Dad sighed. I owe you the truth. I folded my hands on the table. I'm listening. He looked down before speaking. When you girls were kids, Emily struggled with everything. School, friends, money, responsibility. We kept stepping in because we thought if we didn't, she'd fall apart. And me? He smiled sadly. You always landed on your feet. That isn't a compliment, Dad. I know. We confused strength with needing less love. Those words hit me harder than I expected. We thought you didn't need us. I did. My voice cracked. I just stopped asking because I already knew the answer. Dad wiped his eyes. I know. No. I shook my head. You know now. But you didn't know when I was 16 and bought my own prom dress. You didn't know when I worked 2 jobs through college. You didn't know when I cried myself to sleep because you gave away my future. People in nearby booths had started glancing over. Neither of us cared. I failed you, Dad whispered. You did. For the first time in my life. I didn't soften the truth to protect someone else's feelings. Before we left, Dad reached into his briefcase. I found something in your mother's filing cabinet. He handed me a thick manila envelope. I think it belongs to you. What is it? I couldn't bring myself to read it. When I got back to my apartment, I opened the envelope. Inside were dozens of documents. Old bank statements. Canceled checks. Insurance records. Even copies of tax returns. The more I read, the sicker I felt. There wasn't one bailout. There were dozens. Over the past 15 years, my parents had paid off Emily's debts 5 different times. a failed online business, credit cards, a car loan, personal loans, the boutique. Together, it added up to more than $620,000. $620,000. I couldn't believe it. Then I found another document. A spreadsheet. Dad's handwriting. Across the top, he'd written, "Money we've given Emily." Underneath, every payment, every loan, every withdrawal, every dollar. At the bottom was another section. Money given to Sarah. There were only 3 entries. My 10th birthday bicycle, high school graduation gift, a wedding check. The total, less than $8,000. I stared at those numbers until they blurred. It wasn't about comparing gifts. It was seeing my entire childhood reduced to a spreadsheet. And realizing my parents had accidentally documented their favoritism. That evening, my phone rang. It was Aunt Linda. "I need to see you. Is everything okay?" "No. There are things you still don't know." An hour later, we met at her house. She poured 2 cups of tea before sitting across from me. "I didn't tell you everything because I wasn't sure your father was ready." "Ready for what?" She took a deep breath. "Your grandmother changed her will 6 months before she died." I frowned. I thought everything was divided equally. Linda slowly shook her head. "It wasn't." "What do you mean?" "Your grandmother originally planned to leave everything to your parents. But after she saw what was happening between you and Emily, she changed it." I leaned forward. "Changed it how?" Linda disappeared into another room. When she came back, she placed a sealed envelope on the table. Across the front was written in elegant handwriting, "To be opened if Sarah ever learns the truth." My heart started pounding. "What is this?" "I've kept it for 4 years. You were supposed to receive it only if your parents finally admitted what they'd done." My hands started shaking. "Why didn't Grandma give it to me herself?" Linda's eyes filled with tears. "She died 2 weeks after signing it." I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. My grandmother's handwriting was unmistakable. "My sweet Sarah, if you're reading this, then my greatest fear came true. I prayed your parents would one day realize what they were doing before it was too late. If they didn't, then you deserve to know something." I stopped breathing. Linda quietly reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Keep reading." I looked back at the letter. "I've watched you spend your whole life believing you were loved a little less. You weren't. You were simply expected to survive what your sister never could. That was unfair. And I refuse to let history repeat itself." There was another folded piece of paper inside the envelope. It wasn't a letter. It was a legal document. A copy of Grandma's final will. I unfolded it slowly. Then my eyes landed on one sentence. And everything changed. "My lake house, investment account, and personal trust shall pass directly to my granddaughter, Sarah Mitchell." I looked up at Aunt Linda. "I don't understand." She smiled through tears. "Neither will the rest of your family." "What do you mean?" "They have no idea." I stared at the will in complete disbelief. If this document was real, then my parents and Emily were about to discover that Grandma had seen everything and made one final decision before she died. One that would change the Mitchell family forever. I must have read the will 5 times before I finally looked up. "Aunt Linda, this has to be a mistake." She gently shook her head. "It isn't. Your grandmother changed her will 6 months before she passed away." "But why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because almost no one knew. The attorney who handled her estate was instructed to keep one part of the will sealed unless certain circumstances came to light." "What circumstances?" Linda looked me straight in the eye. "If it became clear that your parents had continued choosing Emily at your expense." I leaned back in my chair, completely overwhelmed. "So Grandma knew?" Linda nodded. "She knew far more than anyone realized." 3 days later, Linda called again. "The attorney wants everyone at his office tomorrow morning." "Everyone?" "Your parents, Emily, you, and me." My stomach immediately tightened. Something told me this wasn't just about an inheritance. It was about the truth. The next morning, I arrived at the law office 15 minutes early. The receptionist led me into a large conference room. A long wooden table filled the center of the room. At the far end sat Mr. Howard, my grandmother's estate attorney. He stood to greet me. Sarah, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. So am I. A few minutes later, my parents walked in. Mom looked nervous. Dad barely looked at anyone. Emily arrived last. She walked into the room wearing designer sunglasses and carrying an expensive handbag. She looked annoyed. I had to cancel a meeting for this. Nobody answered. Mr. Howard closed the conference room door. Thank you all for coming. He placed a thick file on the table. Before Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell passed away, she left very specific instructions regarding her estate. Emily smiled confidently. I thought everything was already settled years ago. Mr. Howard adjusted his glasses. Most of it was. This portion was not. The smile slowly disappeared from Emily's face. What does that mean? It means your grandmother anticipated the possibility of future family conflict. The room became silent. He opened the file. Mrs. Mitchell wrote several personal letters to accompany her final amendments. He picked up one envelope. This letter is addressed to the entire family. Without another word, he began reading. To my family. If this letter is being read, then I was right to worry. For years, I watched one granddaughter become everyone's responsibility while the other became everyone's strength. Strength should never be punished. Responsibility should never become invisible. Sarah spent her childhood earning love she already deserved. Emily spent hers believing someone else would always rescue her. Neither lesson was healthy. My mother's eyes immediately filled with tears. Mr. Howard continued reading. Tom and Rebecca, you loved both girls. But love without fairness leaves scars that last a lifetime. Every time Sarah sacrificed, you called her mature. Every time Emily failed, you called her misunderstood. One daughter learned independence. The other learned entitlement. Emily suddenly interrupted. This is ridiculous. Mr. Howard calmly looked at her. Please don't interrupt. Then he continued. I cannot change the past. But I can change what happens after I'm gone. The room was completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Mr. Howard placed the letter down. Then he picked up another document. Mrs. Mitchell amended her estate 6 months before her passing. He looked directly at me. Sarah, your grandmother left you her lake house. I blinked. What? He continued. She also left you her investment portfolio. And the family trust. Emily's chair scraped loudly across the floor. Excuse me. Mr. Howard looked at her calmly. The total estimated value today is approximately. He glanced at the paperwork. $2.8 million. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Emily looked like she couldn't believe what she'd heard. Mom covered her mouth with both hands. Dad simply stared at the table. Finally, Emily laughed. That's impossible. It should have gone to Mom and Dad. Mr. Howard nodded. Originally, yes. But your grandmother legally changed her will. Emily slammed both hands on the table. This isn't fair. For the first time in my life. Someone answered before I could. Dad. He slowly looked up at Emily. No. His voice was calm. This. He glanced toward me. Is the fairest thing that's happened in this family for a very long time. Emily stared at him in disbelief. Dad. He turned toward her. We created this. We spent years protecting you. We kept telling ourselves we were helping. We weren't. We were hurting both of you. Mom started crying openly. I thought Sarah understood. Dad looked at her. She understood because we never gave her another choice. The room became painfully quiet. Then, Dad stood up. He walked around the table until he was standing beside me. For a second, I thought he wanted to hug me. Instead, he simply looked me in the eyes. I'm sorry. Not the quick apology I'd heard before. Not the kind people offer to end an argument. A real apology. I missed birthdays. I missed your victories. I celebrated your sacrifices instead of protecting you. You deserved better parents. Tears rolled down my face. So did Emily. He nodded. Yes, we failed both of our daughters. Emily suddenly shook her head. So that's it? You're blaming me now? Dad answered gently. No, I'm blaming myself. You didn't make these choices. We did. Emily looked around the room. Nobody was defending her. Nobody was making excuses anymore. For perhaps the first time in her life, she had to face the consequences of her own decisions. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and walked out. The door slammed behind her. No one chased after her. That had never happened before. Over the following months, life slowly changed. My parents sold the family home and moved into a smaller place they could actually afford. Dad found a part-time consulting job because he refused to retire until their finances were stable again. Mom started volunteering at a local community center. She later admitted it was her way of learning how to give without expecting something in return. Emily moved to another state. We spoke only once after that. She told me she was finally paying off her own debts. For the first time. No one else was doing it for her. As for me, I kept my job. I moved into Grandma's lake house after renovating it. Every morning, I'd sit on the back porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the water. It wasn't the money that meant the most. It was knowing someone had truly seen me. Someone had noticed every quiet sacrifice, every disappointment, every time I'd smiled through heartbreak. Grandma hadn't just left me a house. She left me proof that I was never invisible. About a year later, Dad invited me to lunch. Just the two of us. As we finished eating, he smiled and said, "You know something?" "What?" "I used to think being a good parent meant fixing every problem." I smiled. "And now?" "Now I know it means loving your children equally, even when one of them makes life harder." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. For the first time in decades, it felt like we were finally starting over. Not because the past had disappeared, but because someone had finally been brave enough to tell the truth. Looking back now, I don't hate my family. Hate is too heavy to carry forever. But I also don't confuse forgiveness with allowing people to keep hurting me. Sometimes loving yourself means walking away. Sometimes it means setting boundaries. And sometimes, justice doesn't come from revenge. It comes from finally being seen. And after 30 years of feeling like the second choice, I finally realized I never needed my family's approval to know my worth.